Good evening, everyone. My name is Lonnie Friedman. I am the health literacy specialist for Vaughan Public Libraries. I'm located in the Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital. There is a library branch, a public library branch in the hospital. If you ever find yourself here, please visit us. We have quite a special presentation by Susan Lambert. She's part of Boomerang Health, powered by SickKids. Before we start today's session on your teens and their emotions, I would like to first do a land acknowledgement. Vaughan Public Libraries respectfully acknowledges that our libraries were built upon the territory and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation per the Toronto Purchase Agreement, or Treaty 13. We also recognize we are situated in the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee, who occupied this land before the arrival of European settlers. The city of Vaughan is currently home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge their contributions to the life and prosperity of this land. As representatives of the people of the city of Vaughan, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. Now to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Susan L. Lambert is a clinical psychologist at Boomerang Health SickKids, clinic located in Vaughan. She has extensive training in the psychological assessment and treatment of children, adolescents, and families, and a wealth of experience providing support to youth and their families struggling with a range of mental health difficulties. Her experiences include assessing and treating anxiety, depression, emotional regulation issues, attentional difficulties, anger management problems, school issues, parent-child relationship conflict, and adjustment difficulties. Dr. Lambert uses evidence-based technique to guide her approach to assessments and treatment, while also taking into consideration and being sensitive to the unique needs of her clients. She is passionate about delivering quality care with the goal of improving the lives of children, adolescents, and their families. Dr. Lambert earned her doctorate and master's degree in Clinical-Developmental Psychology from York University, and she is registered with the College of Psychologists of Ontario. So once again, before Susan takes over, if you have any questions for Susan, she will, please put them in the chat your questions. And at the end of the presentation, I'll read them out anonymously and she'll address them. So with that being said, Dr. Lambert, it's all you.
Thank you so much. You can hear me okay, Lonnie? Okay.
I can, yeah.
Perfect. So welcome, everyone. Thank you all for taking time out of your night to come join and listen and learn something about you and your teens and their emotions. It's a pretty general topic, a pretty broad topic, I should say, that encompasses a lot of different things. So there's kind of two things that I thought I would focus on today. So I want to kind of do like a really brief review about kind of what is, when we say adolescent development and adolescent period, what does that actually really mean? Then I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about emotions and why they're important and what caregivers can do kind of in terms of supporting their teens when they're helping them with emotion regulation. And then if we have some time, I thought I would switch gears a bit and talk about kind of some of the, I would say, like the hot button issues these days and the most common things that teens are struggling with right now, related to pandemic and anxiety in general, social media, and sleep. Those are kind of, I would say, the most common things that we see that kids are coming to our clinic with. So I hope these are some of the things that you were hoping to get out of today. And hopefully, I always say, like, if you can kind of take home one pearl of wisdom, if you leave with, people, they say you kind of learn 10% of what you hear in a presentation. So hopefully something resonates with you and you can try practicing it and putting it into your everyday life. So what do we know about adolescent development? We know that, and maybe let me actually back up a little bit and say, what actually is adolescent development? So we call it the teen years because it really is. I tell kids all the time and parents, it is the in-between period, right? We're not kids anymore, where we're totally dependent on our parents for everything, but we're not quite adults either, right? We're transitioning between the period of childhood and the period of adulthood. And so we're trying to work through making decisions for ourselves, figuring out what kind of adult we want to be while our brains are still developing and while we're going through this puberty period. So it's certainly probably the most challenging time of a person's lifespan. I think after ages 0 to 2, it's the period of the most significant changes in development. So it's really important to kind of always keep that in mind and keep that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about what your child is struggling with, or and I mean to say caregivers. So this is relevant to parents, this is relevant to teachers, coaches, anyone that has a lot of contact with teens. Okay, so what we know about puberty, there is a lot of research these days that's saying girls are maturing earlier in recent decades than they ever have. We are even noticing that trend develop in boys as well. For some reason, the girls developing earlier seems to be more of a consistent trend than it is for boys. And what is puberty? So puberty is a process that lasts about 4 years or so, the actual puberty period. So it's not just a specific event. We often say like, oh, they went through puberty, but it's really a period of about 4 years. In girls, it starts with breast development between ages 8 to 13, ends with your cycle. And for boys, it starts around 9 to 14, the growth of sexual organs, and ends with facial hair and deepening voice. So there's not like this is when puberty happens. It's definitely a period. And then that's just puberty, right? So that's taken within the context of general adolescent brain development. We know, speaking of brain development, that puberty is one of the greatest periods of brain development. The amygdala, which is responsible for all of our emotions, is developing in a great way during this period. And we also know, in speaking about development in general, the trajectory of puberty and this period is really individuation from primary caregiver towards peer relationships. So the key feature of this transition period is my parents, I still love my parents, I still care about my parents, and I always will, but I'm individuating. I don't depend on them for my needs anymore, and I'm looking to create peer relationships for those needs. That is a hallmark of adolescent development. And so it's really important to kind of have that understanding. So why are we talking about adolescent development in general? Well, because it very much relates to mental health. So I'm citing a couple of studies here, but they talk about how this stage of development, it might be common sense to us, but how this stage of development impacts mental health. So there's lots of different pieces to consider. There's an increase of anxiety and depression, and we call those our internalizing issues during the adolescent period. So study after study has shown that during this period, more than any other period, individuals rate higher levels of anxiety and depression, as well as externalizing issues. So some people, they identify more with like anger management issues or rule breaking behavior and conduct problems. These are the kids that we tend to maybe notice more, have more interactions in the school setting because they're acting out. But both of these things are much more prevalent during the puberty period. There's also evidence to say that girls who go through puberty earlier, and we know recently that girls are going through puberty earlier, show an increased rate of these issues. There's less evidence that the same thing is happening in boys, but there is evidence that late maturing boys who have not started to go through that puberty process, report elevated mental health symptoms compared to their peers. So what might this be about? What's the connection? So, some researchers have found and have researched that there's this social comparison piece, right? Because we're individuating and because we're more interested in peers, and we're comparing ourselves more to peers during this period, and we're comparing ourselves kind of physically and in terms of puberty. And so if we're different, if we've gone through puberty earlier, or all our friends have gone through puberty and we haven't, we might have more negative comparisons. And that also might make us feel less confident in our relationships with our peers, which could lead to a variety of things, but risky behavior being kind of the most concerning. So that's one piece. The other piece is there might be some developmental inconsistencies. So how I look physically doesn't match how I'm thinking and acting. And so if our emotional development isn't in line with our age or physically, there's different expectations, right? A parent who sees someone that looks like a full-grown adult, because they went through puberty early, might have different expectations of that child. So I want to keep that in the back of your mind. And now I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking about kind of what do we know about mental health in general, and what's our understanding and our framework. So what do we need to pay attention to given what we know about adolescent development? So we talk about the biopsychosocial model. There used to be this argument, is it nature, is it nurture? Why do certain people develop these things and not others? But now we really think of it as our mental health symptoms as being created by this really integrated biopsychosocial model. Some of the factors in the model change and some stay the same. So I'm going to kind of go through them overall. So genes, that doesn't change, right? Our genes are pretty consistent from before we're born. Our temperament, again, this is something from a young age. Different kids have different kinds of temperament. This is kind of our a shyer temperament or a really busy, active temperament. So, you know, a lot of people would say, oh, from a young age, I noticed that he was really interested in being around other kids, or really liked to play quietly by himself. Family environment, epigenetics. So this is kind of the interaction of our genes with our environment that can be unique to people. Our social and cultural factors, life stressors, traumas, different things that are going to impact us, puberty, and emotional avoidance. So all of these things in general, when we talk about mental health, we talk about the biopsychosocial model, and we always think about all these different factors, how they can be related to the mental health symptoms of a person. So any of these things could be more or less relevant in terms of understanding why people are going through what they're going through, right? For some people, the genes are really strong. There's a long history of ADHD in a family, and there's like a very strong genetic component, right? Less so in other people. So of all these different things, as I kind of mentioned before, some things really can't change, right? But some things, there are a little bit more malleable and open to change, right? So genes certainly can't change, temperament certainly can't change, family environment, sometimes we can do things to kind of change how we do things that can have an impact. Sometimes social or cultural factors maybe can have an impact. Life stressors, you know, my family's going through a renovation right now, and so we're in the middle of moving. So that's a life stressor. Eventually that will change and things will be more stable again, but we can't kind of just stop our reno right now. So it's not really that changeable. Puberty, we cannot change. Emotional avoidance is certainly something we can change. And that's what I really want to focus on today and talk a little bit more about. So what does that mean exactly? What is emotional avoidance? So what are emotions? Emotions are powerful. They can take control, whether we want them to or not. Different researchers, there's this type of therapy called emotion-focused family therapy and emotion-focused therapy. Dr. Les Greenberg, Dr. Joanne Delhanty are a few of the researchers that work in this area, and they coined the term the brain boss. So emotions really are our brain boss. They control us and take over whether we want them to or not. And so it's important to kind of keep in mind that we all have emotions and they do take over sometimes. And so what do we do when the emotions come? We can't stop them from coming. We need to figure out, how do we process our emotions? And really, more and more, we're really talking about how key this is to good mental health. And the idea is that emotional avoidance is at the root of many problems with emotions. So often we don't want to feel the feeling that we're feeling when it's a negative feeling. It doesn't feel good. We don't like it. So we want to avoid it. But in order to process an emotion, I'm going to talk more about this. We have to experience it. In order to heal it and regulate it and move on, we really have to allow that experience to come through us. Experiencing an emotion is hard work, but so is avoiding an emotion. And if we avoid an emotion, they cause us distress, they don't disappear. So we kind of push it down until it explodes, or until it turns into, we're abusing substances, or we're not sleeping, and then our sleep is impacting our work, or there's different ways, right? But the key is to really think about, how do I want to deal with this emotion? And the more we avoid, the harder it can be for us. And this is for everyone, right? Children, teens, adults. There's certain people, even more so, struggle with emotion regulation, and we call them super feelers. So for super feelers, their radar to emotions is heightened. We say that they feel pain more intensely. They're more bombarded with emotional stimuli. So there's 10 people sitting in a room, something maybe mildly unpleasant is happening. The super feeler feels it in a much deeper way than other people do. It's like getting a new hearing aid that's turned way up. Or I think of it as if you have a 3rd-degree sunburn, right? If someone touches your arm, it doesn't hurt. But if you have a sunburn, the minute they touch your arm, you can really, really feel it. So some people are just more attuned to emotion, have a more heightened sense of emotions around them, and then are more impacted by them. They get overwhelmed easily, and they have a hard time coming back down. So, some people might have this intense negative emotion. It feels terrible. They don't like it, and then it goes away. But for other people, it really sits with them for a while when you're a super feeler, and it takes longer to kind of de-escalate. And I haven't really mentioned this, but when I'm talking about emotions, I'm talking about, there's thousands of different words we use. But it really comes down to kind of 4 main emotions, happy, sad, angry, scared. All our emotions kind of fall into those main categories. If you think about that movie, that was a great movie talking about emotions, Inside Out. And they really kind of go back to those as being the core emotions. So knowing how important it is to regulate emotion, knowing how challenging a period it is of adolescence, going through all these changes, brain development, physical changes, individuating from our parent, trying to make these friendship connections. And then we have the same emotions that everyone else has, right? We're having school, we're having friendship stress, all these different things. So it's always hard to regulate emotion, but I would argue that it's particularly hard in this adolescent period. And the research shows that there is more mental health struggles during this period. So it makes sense. So what can we do? And, I work with kids and teens. And when I went into grad school, I said, I want to work with kids. I love kids. Kids are amazing. And more in my practice, really, it's about working with caregivers. Who am I in an hour a week to make any kind of long-lasting change? There's certainly things we can do, but it's really about the caregivers that you guys are in the homes. You're with your kids all the time, every day. Sometimes you need an outside person to kind of say something that your kid wouldn't hear if you said it to them. Often that's the case. But really, I see us as working as a team. And so caregivers, really, it's not your fault that any of these things have happened, but certainly to get better, having that caregiver support and being a part of the solution and working towards getting better is really, really key. Your kids best, better than anyone else. So how do caregivers help? What can you do to help navigate this pathway through puberty? How can you help your kids learn better coping skills to navigate the negative effects of their emotions during this period? Because again, as we know, those who respond more adaptively to stress have plans to deal with them and regulate their emotion, adjust better as they get older. So how do we do this? How do we respond to emotion, big emotions in our teens? Well, most of us at some point or another, some of us often, unintentionally respond to emotions in our kids in unhelpful ways. And this isn't unique to teens. This is true of kids as well. It's unintentional. We don't intend to, but we often respond in ways that can lead to future instances of emotional avoidance. So we respond in ways that can result in difficulties learning emotion regulation or good coping skills. So what do I mean by this? I'm going to give you an example. And I'll say, and I'm going to come back to this again, we often respond when we're parenting, we respond reactively. Situations pop up and we respond in the moment, right? So there's a negative emotion, there's anger, there's crying. We just need to react to the situation that's happening in the moment. We're often not proactive in our parenting, even though at the end of the day, if you had to look back, or if I asked each of you, like, what's one or two things that's kind of a consistent battle in your house, you would all have something, you would know. So we actually could be theoretically very proactive in, this is the thing I want to have a plan for in advance of how I'm going to manage, but we don't really do that, right? We're always kind of just doing a million different things and we're just responding in the moment reactively. And so that's one thing we're going to think a little bit more about today. Okay, so what do I mean by we unintentionally respond in unhelpful ways? So here's an example. Your child comes to you and says, I didn't get invited to the party. I'm a loser. Nobody likes me. What's your first impulse? What are you going to say to your child in that moment? So just take a minute and I just want you to think, like, if your child came to you and said this, how might you respond? So I would guess that a lot of people are going to say something like, no, that's not true. I love you, right? No, of course you got invited. There must be a mistake, or, you're not a loser. I love you. You have so many friends, right? So why do we do that? So before I say why we do that, let's talk about some common responses. So that might be a really common one for a lot of people. That's the reassurance, or that's not reassurance. That's deny. So that's not true. I like you, right? So we're denying what they're telling us. Sometimes we might ask questions or dig for more information. What do you mean? What happened? Who told you that? Right? So you're going to kind of probe them more and like ask a lot of follow-up questions. You might want, don't worry about it, right? We all do that. We all say, don't worry. There was a song about that, right? Logic. What are you talking about? Tell me, like, you're looking for evidence. What do you mean? Like, tell me the story. Like, I need to understand this because I don't really think this is true. You're going to try to fix and problem solve, which is an excellent response, an excellent way to deal with it, but we often jump to this too quickly. So yes, we want to problem solve, we want to help them through it, but we kind of jump there quickly, and that doesn't really help with emotion regulation. Deny, as I said, we're going to say, that's not true. I like you. We're going to dismiss, don't be silly. What are you talking about? Oh, that party doesn't matter anyways, right? We're going to ignore. Maybe you just pretend you didn't hear what they said. Oh, those kids are idiots. Let's focus on things to be grateful for. Maybe they didn't mean it. They had a bad day. So we're going to kind of ignore what they're telling us. Blame. well, maybe if you were nicer to your friends, or maybe if you did this, right? So we're blaming our child. Or minimize. Oh, it's not that bad. So these are all common responses because we all do these things sometimes. And it makes sense, because why do we respond this way? Well, we don't want to see our kids in pain, right? To us, also, it might be that an overreaction, right? It might seem something really small. We might not understand why they're reacting that way, or why they're reacting in such a big way to something that seems so unreasonable, right? Or we can see the bright side of it, or the positive aspect of a situation. There's a reason for that. There's a reason why we can do this, is because we have fully developed adult brains, right? Teens do not. So we can't expect them to experience things the same way that we do. They don't have the same wisdom or life experiences. So instead of when we're in this situation, our impulse is not to go into the emotion and help them feel it, acknowledge the feeling, go deeper. No, our impulse is to pull them out, right? Because of our fully developed adult brains, we can see things in a way that they can't. And so we want to help them feel better. We don't want them to feel this way, right? We don't want to see our kids in pain. We don't agree. We don't think this is true. We think they're overreacting. We don't want to hurt ourselves, right? We feel hurt when our kids are hurt. If our child is rejected, we feel like it's a rejection of us. Sometimes we also just don't know what else to say, right? We don't want to make it worse. And we often have this idea that if we pay attention to something, we're going to make it worse. We're going to reinforce it. If we keep talking about it, the kid's going to actually think this is true. And we certainly don't want to do that. So we have all these fears as parents, right? That last thing we ever want to do is cause even more pain for our child. In actuality, paying attention to feelings does not make them worse. When emotions are felt, there's this neural pathway in our brain that completes in our nervous system. And by feeling the feeling, we process it, and then it dissolves. And so it's really important to not minimize, not deny, not ignore all the common things that we often do. We want to actually sit with the feeling and be in the pain with our child, even though it's really painful, because that's really the best way to work through the pain, to avoid emotional avoidance. And we know emotional avoidance is related to mental health difficulties. But so why do we do this? Why do I say these are common responses? Well, we're not taught this stuff, right? We're not taught, we always say parenting doesn't come with a handbook. No one knows how to sit with these big, uncomfortable feelings, and particularly because they make us uncomfortable too. So again, like some of the challenges with our common responses is that when we minimize or deny or ignore, our kids are learning to feel that their emotional reactions or experiences are unwelcome. They're misunderstood, they're invalid, and they may learn to hold back their emotions next time. They might be less open next time, right? I don't want to share this because last time my mom kind of just poo-pooed it, right? They may not fully learn how to cope with their feelings, which can contribute to more maladaptive coping. Okay, so what can we do instead? We call it emotion coaching. And the idea of emotion coaching is really about connection and validation. And so I'm going to talk about a few different techniques that are related to this. And so the idea of connection is that in order to help our kids process their emotions, because they're not fully formed adults, and even adults, if you had a friend that would come to you, and they were upset, you wouldn't want to leave them alone to figure it out. Like, they're coming to you they want that connection. Or think about a time that you were upset and maybe you went to your partner. You're looking for connection. You're not necessarily looking for problem solving. Maybe eventually you are, but first you need to know someone's in this boat with me. Someone gets what I'm saying and someone is sitting with me. And so there's some different strategies that we can use to show that we're trying to connect. So we can use nonverbal means of communication to show connection. So nonverbal behavior is really powerful. We can really communicate a lot without saying a thing. So, these are just some pictures, like our tone of voice, our facial expression, our body language. These show how connected or not connected we are, right? So I often use the example of, I'm doing the dishes and my kid's crying behind me and I'm kind of trying to talk to them, but also do the dishes at the same time. Sometimes I do that. And sometimes when I'm kind of calm and in the right frame of mind, I turn off the water, I take off my gloves, I get down at their level, I look them in the eye, and I'm just non-verbally communicating, okay, I really want to connect with you now in this moment. And these are images of kids, but I would argue the same is true for teens. So for kids, we want to get down below them and look up at them. It's called the below eye level technique. But for teens, we want to sit side by side, right? So we want to, or we can lean back and sit on the floor. So they are kind of higher up than us, which is pretty rare, right? Kids and teens are often looking up to us, maybe not older teens, but you want to be eye level. And one thing that I didn't really talk about, or I'm not going to get into today, but it's just this idea. So Dan Siegel does a lot of work on this, and he calls it the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. And so the idea is when we're in this reactive brain state, when we're in that fight or flight, kind of instinctual response, we're not receptive to learning, we're not receptive to communication, we're not receptive to problem solving. So in order to work through the problem and figure out some solutions, we need to be in upstairs brain state. We need to be in this receptive, responsive, reflective brain state. And so in order to get from the downstairs brain state to the upstairs brain state, we need that connection. We need to, convey warmth and calm and confidence to help change the state that we're in. So another way to think about connection is to really just be patient. So we talk about emotions as coming in waves, and emotions are our brain boss. We can't stop them from coming, right? We can rationalize and have all these thoughts about why I shouldn't be upset right now or why I should be feeling better. But when we have an emotion, we have an emotion. And so if the anger's there or if the worry is there, we have to let that moment, the intense physical sensation I'm talking about, not kind of a long-standing worried thought, but the worry feeling that we feel inside our body, for example, the heart racing, the butterflies in our tummy. We can't stop that. Once it's started, we need to let the feeling pass. And so we just want to think of it as riding the wave of the emotion. And so we have to be patient. We want to avoid getting to that escalated state, but if we're there, like thinking another example of anger. So once we're in that 10 out of 10 anger state, we really just have to sit with that and be patient and recognize this is going to take some time. There are things you can say in that moment, right? So in our connection, we've given the nonverbal cues. And so we could say things like, I'm here with you right now. I hear that you need space. I want to be here for you. I'm going to stay close. I'm going to be right next door. Please come find me when you're ready. You're going to model being calm. You're going to talk about just being kind of comfortable with silence and that you're there and we don't have to talk, but I'm here. So another thing, when we think about connection strategies, there's this idea of the shark music. And so the shark music is what's our internal dialogue that keeps us from being fully present in the moment, right? So when I am not calm, when I'm, doing my dishes and my kid is crying behind me, what's my shark music? Oh God, here we go again. This is the 10th tantrum they've had this week, or this is the 10th time they've come home with a bad math mark, and now they're upset again, and now they're going to fail out of school. And right, like, what's all the thoughts that I'm having before I even engage in that situation? And so we talk about, you know, altering our perceptions of our child in that moment, because we're thinking about our child from the past or our child from the future. And it prevents us from parenting intentionally that child in that moment with that situation. And so we want to, it's there, it's unavoidable that we're going to have this, what we call shark music. But we want to turn it down. We want to notice it. And you can think about, you know, what is your shark music? What's the kind of the biggest stressor in your family right now? What's the biggest struggle your teen is having? And what's your shark music about that? And so proactively, you're going to think about, okay, over the course of the next week or the next month, when my child presents with this situation, I'm going to stop. I'm going to take a deep breath myself. I'm going to think about, okay, like, now I'm thinking about all the times they failed school, and I'm thinking about this and this, and I'm just going to stop and take a deep breath and really just focus on being in this moment. So in terms of how we turn down our shark music, so we stop, we listen to what that soundtrack is. So, you know, the idea of shark music comes from the Jaws soundtrack, right? We all know when we hear that da na 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 na, that is like something is coming, right? So we want to just stop, turn it down, be fully present, parenting this child in this moment, and letting go of our own agenda. And we can't always do this. So if you're not doing it, that's okay, but you're going to recognize, yeah, this isn't going well because I have my own stuff, right? And so if you're being really proactive about, I really want to help my child process this emotion right now, we're going to work on letting go. And so practicing mindfulness. So there's some really great apps out there to help us relax, do breathing. You know, every night before bed, just practice like 30 seconds or 1 or 2 minutes of just practicing being in the moment and being calm and getting good at it, so that when you're in that situation, you can access that coping strategy for yourself. So the most important, so I want everyone to think about that and kind of think about maybe what is getting in the way for you of being able to connect with your child in that moment. And it's not that you have to do anything about it, but just noticing it is a really helpful step. And then most importantly, the key part of connection is the idea of validation. So first we've stopped, we've taken some deep breaths, we've turned down our shark music, we're showing connection, and now we really want to attend to the emotion. So our goal here with validation is to accept our child's emotion, even and especially if we don't like it or we don't agree with it. And I say often to caregivers, there's a difference between an emotion and a behavior. Emotions are always okay. It is always okay to feel angry. It is not okay to hit. It is always okay to feel anxious. It is not okay to stay home from school and, you know, not go to classes. So it's really important to separate, like, right now I'm just focusing on the feeling. Eventually I will problem solve and I will deal with whatever the behavior is. But first I really want to attend to the emotion. So even when there's things like, you know, my kid is rule breaking and staying out late, or I'm worrying about substances, yeah, maybe there's consequences that need to happen for rule breaking behavior. But first, I really want to understand what's going on here right now. What is this emotion that you're feeling in this moment that made you act in this way, that made you end up wanting to do this thing? Okay, so how do we validate? So first, we want to acknowledge the presence of the emotion, right? So, hey, I see something's up, right? We just want to like bring it to the forefront, put it on the table. And then I have to name it. So this often is a really actually hard thing to do. We often feel emotions all the time, but do we actually have names for them? And do we have a good feeling vocabulary? Can we put our feelings into words? So we want to help our teens with this, because this is the period of time that like will be really helpful for them to be able to put their feelings into words more and more. So identify and describe the emotion. Use like body sensations. So you look sad, you look tense, right? And then validate. So validate means putting yourself in their shoes and trying to understand their perspective. You're not going to go for the bright side. You're not going to explain with logic. You're just going to validate what their experience is. And we say there's this idea of speaking the unspoken. So we speak the unspoken words that they might not be able to say out loud. So I understand why you might feel sad about this. It really hurts to be excluded, right? Especially when all of your friends are going to the party. I'm just going to go through this next part quickly. But so this example, I didn't get invited to the party. I'm a loser. Nobody likes me. Well, no wonder you feel sad. And then what do you want to say next? We often say something like, but, you know, you'll get invited next time, right? And so a really helpful trick when we think about validation is about using the word because instead of the word but. Because as soon as you say but, you're kind of invalidating everything that came before the but. So the key to validation, transforming but to because. So for example, they feel sad about missing the party. You're going to really validate. I can understand why this might feel sad for you, but there's always next time. Well, as soon as you say but, you're kind of invalidating that they're actually sad. And so what you want to do instead is really imagine why this must be hard for them. And using the word because helps us do that. It shows our understanding. So no wonder you feel sad. I'm going to give you some examples. So no wonder you feel sad because you're going to miss out on the fun, and because you were really looking forward to this, and because you don't know when you're going to have another chance to do this. By using that word, it really is forcing you to come up with some theories as to why they're feeling the feeling they're feeling. You might be wrong. They might say, that's not what it is, it's this, but you're opening the dialogue, you're connecting, you're showing, I'm really trying to understand what this must be about for you. You're not saying I agree, right? But you're just showing them, I'm putting myself in your shoes and I'm understanding where you're coming from. So keys to emotion coaching. And this is super, super brief. This is like a 3-part workshop that we do at Boomerang. And a lot of agencies, it's like, you know, a few weeks of training, but really briefly, the idea is we cannot and should not stop our kids or teens from having emotions. It's what we do when we have our strong emotions, how we work through them. And that's what emotion regulation is all about. And when you can maintain your relationship in the face of a big emotion, you're teaching your kids that it's okay to have the emotion, and there's nothing wrong with the emotion. Again, emotions are okay, behaviors are not always. And you're going to do this through modeling and reinforcing. So you're going to be regulating because you're probably feeling something too in that moment, but by you staying calm and you staying connected, you're modeling and reinforcing how to regulate emotion. So I'm just conscious of the time. I might just kind of flip through these slides really quickly, although it kind of shifts into some of the kind of common presenting issues that I think teens are struggling with right now. So I'll maybe just kind of mention them quickly, but I think we can't underestimate the impact of the pandemic, particularly on teens. I think particularly for kids that started the adolescent transition period 3 years ago. So they were 12, 13, and now they're 16, 17, or kids that were, 9, 10 and are now 12, 13, right? Like, so there's all these gaps that happened during the pandemic that I think are going to be particularly impactful on teens as they go through this period. Anxiety is a really common, issue that a lot of teens are struggling with. So Anxiety Canada is a really excellent website with lots of good resources. I urge you to look it out. And it's just this idea of understanding that fight, flight, freeze. And again, it's kind of back to understanding our emotion, and then how do we regulate that emotion once we understand it. And so this is, again, the Anxiety Canada website. They have a really nice app that kids can access, and parents can too. And it's based on evidence-based research, CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, which takes into account the focus on emotion. So I'm not going to go through that. Social media, it's unavoidable. We all use it. I would urge you, if this is something that you're really struggling with, to look at the Canadian Pediatric Society's position statement on screen time. So they talk about these 4 M's and what you can do to kind of just be more aware of how you're doing these 4 things, and if there's areas that maybe you can manage. So, thinking about just being aware of your screen time usage and your kids, being mindful, using screen times mindfully. So kind of not always on in the background, but like I'm consciously making an effort to use screen time now. Thinking about mitigating the type of social media they're engaging with. So being, involved a little bit in what they're accessing, paying attention, maybe sitting with them when they're watching certain shows to kind of have a bit of a sense, and then how you're modeling for yourselves. And then I was going to talk a little bit about sleep. And so really the key here is there's a lot of research coming out, or has been coming out over the past 5 to 10 years about how impactful sleep is and how they mimic a lot of mental health issues. So what could actually end up being a sleep issue looks like ADHD or looks like anxiety. And so really thinking about sleep schedules, and particularly during this teenage period where there are all these changes to sleep, thinking about creating good, what we call sleep hygiene. So having a schedule, having a sleep ritual. So always a hot shower before bed, or always, having a certain books that you're going to read, having regular physical activity, again, screen times, like where is my screen at the end of the night? Is it all in one place for everyone? Not having it right beside my bed, those kinds of things. So apologies for rushing through this last part, but I want to take time for some questions. This will be, I guess, in the video that you guys can refer back to, but I would say Anxiety Canada and the foundrybc.ca. So Anxiety Canada has a great section for youth, but it's specifically around anxiety, and Foundry BC is kind of all the other mental health issues for teens in particular in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Susan. We do have a few questions here, so I'll start going through them. I'll read them out anonymously, everyone, so feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. The first question is, what can you recommend for a teen who has tried CBT and DBT without success? High emotional irregulation, very hot-tempered, hates going to school and has difficulty. Meds aren't working either.
That's sounds really tricky. Sounds like there's a lot going on, and you guys have been trying to do a lot of things that so far have not had the success that you would like. I mean, I would say I can't really kind of give a short answer to that question, but I would say what I find often is these problems develop over years, until they kind of explode and we realize, like, so it's always a matter of, we all have feelings, but how impairing is it, right? So when it becomes impairing and it's getting in our way of everyday life, that's when we start to seek support. So it's probably that this has been going on for quite a long time, even well before issues were becoming impairing. And now it's at the point where it's very impairing. So it's going to take time. There's not going to be kind of a quick fix. So even 12 sessions or 24 sessions of CBT might just be kind of the tip of the iceberg. Be patient. Don't give up, I would say. Like, these strategies do work. They just take time. And so finding a clinician that you have a good connection with, being patient, being a part of the solution. Again, like, caregivers don't cause these things, but certainly in terms of making things better, one person doing something alone is very different than a whole team or a whole family system working together. So maybe thinking about some parenting support along with whatever your teen is doing.
That's great. Thank you. Our next question, how do I encourage my teen to go to school regularly when dealing with anxiety/depression? Hard to get moving in the AM and stay motivated. When I encourage, she just says it stresses her out more.
Yeah, and that's okay. And you're going to be stressed. You haven't been going to school. And every day that you don't go to school, of course, it's going to be even more stressful to start going again, right? So feelings are okay. Behavior is not, right? So this really sucks. This is really hard for you. And we have to figure out a solution, right? Like, not going to school is illegal, and what are your goals for yourself? And maybe you don't want to graduate, but do you want to graduate? And like maybe having some of that discussion, so they are motivated, they're interested in reaching that goal. Most likely, for most kids I speak to that aren't going to school, they'll tell me, no, I want to graduate. Like I want to finish, I just don't know how to get there. So the other thing I would say for anxiety is it's something called gradual exposure. So if we haven't been going to school, especially like the pandemic has really, really impacted this for a lot of kids. I would say the anxious kids were kind of the happiest during the pandemic. They were happy staying at home and not having to navigate all that stuff at school. And particularly if they were in like grade 7 and 8, and now they're in high school, right? So they didn't have those kind of pre-adolescent years. It's going to be hard. And so maybe going to school for an entire day, 5 days a week is too much. So let's have realistic expectations. Maybe we're going to go for an hour a day, or we're going to go, only to our first class. Maybe I need to go walk around the school for the next week every day after school to kind of get used to being in the building. Maybe I need to meet with guidance and set something up where I'm going to go in every day and just sit in my guidance office. So I'm not actually going to be going to school just yet, but I'm getting practice and getting used to being back at school. There's lots of ways we can think about kind of breaking it down and making it small, manageable steps. That might be something to think about. I would encourage like working with the school as much as possible in those kinds of situations.
Great. This kind of answers a few other questions where people are just outlining something that's happening to their child. So to sort of address that, one person asks, sorry, we're getting a lot of chat. 1 second. Do you accept new clients? How long would parents need to wait to see you or anyone in Boomerang?
Yes, that is a great question. And unfortunately, the answer is there are wait lists everywhere these days. I think it was, mental health was an issue before the pandemic, and even more so post-pandemic. Sorry, I don't know why that just happened to me. I don't know how to get myself as a spotlight. Anyways, sorry. So you can call the clinic. You don't need a doctor's referral to see anyone in our rehab services. So we have our brain and mental health department where we have psychology, social work, and psychotherapists. But then we also have other services as well: speech, OT, physio, dietitian. So you don't need a medical referral to access our services. You just call our clinic and ask to speak to someone about intake for brain and mental health. We have someone who's dedicated to our department who kind of walks you through and explains the different options for you. There is a wait for assessment and for therapy, for longer term therapy. We do have a new service called SST, single session therapy. And the idea is we're kind of like a walk-in clinic. So you show up once, you're going to meet someone for an hour and a half. You're going to talk about something. You're going to try to kind of get some kind of short-term solution for some really specific thing that's going to help you take that first step and see a small change and move on your way. You might need to access the service a couple of times, but it's not kind of any kind of ongoing therapy. They have WhatsApp walk-in clinics all over the city. So you can also go on their website, but at Boomerang, they're virtual appointments, but you would call, we book. There's no wait list. So we book within the month. So if you call, we're either full for December or we have openings. There's 4 different therapists that every week have a single session therapy spot. And so the idea is kind of like, you don't have to wait for that service, but it's very short term.
I'm going to summarize a couple of questions. Can we have people who, again, have a similar note? So this one kind of summarizes, how do you separate sort of the emotions from behaviors of teens? So for example, they equate anxiety. In other words, I can't go to school. How do you encourage them to go to school without minimizing the anxiety that they're feeling?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say first you want to have the discussion in a moment when they're calm. So if it's, 8 a.m. and they're supposed to be going to school and they're not going, it's probably the feeling that is predominant in that moment. And so you really just need to validate and connect and show that you hear how hard this is and try to understand where they're coming from and use those because sentences to really try to dig as deep as possible. And then once you can see their anxiety is not a 10 out of 10 anymore, it's at a 4 or 3, or you're going to have this conversation on the weekend when there is no stress and they are calm and relaxed. Okay, like we have this problem here. Like you want to graduate, you want to go to school, and you feel really anxious every time you go. Let's try to work on this together. Let's brainstorm all the silly ideas we can. That's the behavior, right? So when you know that anxiety isn't there in that moment, then you can talk about the behavior. But if they're shut down and they're not thinking clearly because they're in that anxious state, they're not going to be able to reason and problem solve.
Great. And let me summarize once again, a few people are hitting on the same frequency. Just wondering if you have some tips of how to encourage a child to express their emotions to you or outwardly. A few parents have touched upon that. How do we give them a sort of vocabulary like we do in other realms of school? How do we sort of build that up within them?
Yeah, so I would say exactly like I talk all the time about, we want to increase the feeling vocabulary at home. So whether that's we're watching a show and, oh, I wonder why that person did that. I wonder how they were feeling. What do you think was happening? Oh, I would feel this way if that happened to me. Modeling, like, is, coming home. Oh, I had a really hard day today. I felt really sad. My friend told me this sad thing that happened, just kind of being open about feelings, and that it's okay to have feelings. I would say would be kind of the number one thing I would say, modeling it. And don't be afraid to be wrong. So if you think your child might be having a feeling in the moment, even if it's not a big 10 out of 10, completely emotionally dysregulated feeling, but you can tell they're a little quieter than normal. Oh, hey, what's up? I wonder if you're feeling a little sad right now. No, I'm not sad. Oh, okay. I'm here if you need to talk. And just kind of putting it out there. They're used to not doing that, or you not doing that maybe. And so it's not going to be a sudden thing, but I like the number one thing about parenting is consistency. So if you're kind of consistently saying that kind of thing day after day, or just, I know you don't want to talk. I just wanted to put it out there that I could tell something might be up. You look a little sad to me, and just kind of putting it out there and leaving it at that.
Yeah. Okay, one person asks, does family therapy help? I have 3 sons and the fathers expressed separation. Clearly there's a lot of tension with what's happening. So would family therapy also be an avenue for them to pursue?
Yeah, I definitely think, again, there's the individual problems, but then there's always a family system, right? We're always living in a context of our family. And so working together, can help address some of those things.
Here's another quick question. This is interesting. What do I do about a teen that has become aggressive at school, but at home he's an angel?
So I wonder what's going on at school, right? I wonder what those emotions are about that's leading to those behaviors. If you're not having those struggles at home, I would imagine they're open to sharing what's happening at school that's making it hard. Maybe getting input from someone else as well, someone at the school, like teacher or there's a behavior therapist or social worker at the school, trying to help work together to understand what's happening, what's different. You might want to understand a little bit more what's different. Is there, for a lot of kids, when that kind of thing is happening, there's no school pressure at home. So is there something about school or learning that's making it hard?
That's good. Just a few more here. Just generally, is there good resources that you can recommend for parents to help us teach our kids about emotions and vice versa for parents too?
Yeah, so in addition to Anxiety Canada and the Foundry, I guess I can put my presentation back up. I thought it would be, sorry. So I would say there's a few that focus specifically on emotion focused, like under emotion regulation. So there's the Mental Health Foundation, and that's Adele Lafranc. And she and some of her colleagues have a lot of different resources in terms of understanding and regulating emotion. What else? There's a few different, I have another sheet with some different resources that aren't teen specific, but may be more relevant. So I can share that and you can add that. I don't know if there's a way to add that, or we.
Yeah, if you send me the websites, I can send it to all of the attendees.
Sure.
Some of these websites, I think that would work well. Okay, I'm just going to do 2 more questions because we're running out of time. One person asked, let's see, is anxiety the same as depression? Recently, my child says she's depressed. However, she still goes to school and socializes with friends. So sort of the distinction there.
So often, no, they're not the same. You can have one or the other. Sometimes anxiety can turn into depression, but you don't need to have anxiety in order to meet criteria for depression. But the idea for both of those issues, or that there's the CBT idea, cognitive behavior therapy, is that we have our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, and they're connected. So I'm thinking, so I see a dog, I'm thinking, oh no, dog, it's going to bite me. I'm feeling scared. My behaviors, I want to run away. Or see dog, think, oh, I miss my dog. I wish I had my dog with me. Life sucks, and then feeling sad, and then behavior, not want to get out of bed. So it's still kind of this idea of the thought, feeling, behavior connection.
Great. Okay, this is the last question we'll take. What do you do when their teen doesn't like to hug or touch when they're emotional and upset?
I would ask, is that okay? I mean, they're processing their emotion. Are they, can you sit with them in that moment and just, I'm going to be here, and if you want to talk, I'm ready to talk. That's what you need in that moment. You might want that physical connection, but not everyone does. And is that okay? Right? Like, is that maybe part of your shark music? Then in order to help my child feel better, I need to kind of physically connect with them. And so kind of taking a deep breath yourself and being there for them, physically, but you don't have to necessarily, like, that might not be what's working for them to help them get through the emotion.
Great. Yes, thank you. So this question is actually to me. This will be a good wrap up. They asked me to provide any links, resources, books that also the library has. So Susan, if you can please share with me these resources you have up on the screen just via email. And then tomorrow I will look through our catalog and find some resources we have at the library for teens and their emotions. And then I will send everyone tomorrow night, probably, or so, everyone who's on this call and anyone who's actually signed up for the program. And then eventually there'll be this recording will also be on our YouTube in the near future. So thank you everyone once again for joining us this evening. Susan, you did a fantastic job. I think just the sheer amount of people who joined, as well as the tremendous amount of questions, shows your expertise, and that it's nice to think of this is not just individual insofar as like it's popping up here and there throughout the community, but this is truly an issue that is collectively we're all going through. So to have this public resource is fantastic. So thank you once again, everyone. for joining. Thank you,
And
Dr.
I really applaud yourselves for coming out tonight and taking that hour, because that shows how much you care and how much you want
Absolutely.
to work on this.
Yes. And for those who are curious, the library, we host quite a few of these type of health sessions. So feel free to go to our website. I'm hosting lots of clinicians, including those from SickKids. They come every quarter. So please be on the lookout if you want to learn more. And of course, you can contact Boomerang Health SickKids anytime. So thank you once again. Oh, and someone asked the website. It's vaughanpl.info, but probably the easiest way of remembering is if you just type in Google Vaughan Public Libraries. And we have a huge calendar of upcoming programs. You can check out resources, and feel free, anyone, to respond to me to that email link I sent you, and I will respond to any of your questions. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.